Welcome back, gamers. Crota's End has been reprised and is back with a vengeance. It's no longer that dungeon strike meme that everyone keeps proclaiming it to be, and while I'm sure this raid will get much less difficult once contest is over, it's no longer simply a one-man job raid where 80% can just be skipped and a single player will be doing all the damage. But before we get to Crota, let's start at the beginning. I do want to preface this by saying that there are many different builds that you can bring to this raid and be just fine, albeit there are some clutch in a particular encounter. So don't feel too concerned with trying to bring one perfect build into this raid. Now onto the encounters, we first have the Abyss encounter. To start the Abyss, you must build up a plate to form a bridge into Crota's End. This is the same thing as Destiny 1, except this time you're going to be greeted with some enemies as it charges. Another thing that'll work the same as Destiny 1 will be the Weight of Darkness debuff once you're actually down there, and this will take away your double jump abilities as well as slow you down. Now, let's go over what the changes are. The first change to the encounter and the opener here is that there will be a Chalice of Light mechanic, or a relic here, for you to use, and this is what is going to be used throughout the encounter. Now, this has a couple of functions here, the first of which is once a player picks it up, you have a progress bar on the left side of your screen, which will then build up over time. Once you have hit the maximum stacks, you will get a debuff on your Chalice called Engulf with Light. Once Engulf with Light is active, if it runs out to 0, you will die. However, the other function here is, once you're at max stacks, another player on your fire team can claim that Chalice, pick it up from you, which will then get rid of your Engulf with Light and save your life. Additionally, this will unlock a new buff and debuff for you afterwards. The buff will be the Enlighten buff, which now allows you to gain the ability to either charge a plate faster for a bridge portion of the encounter, which is the beginning or the end of the Abyss, and then the other function is Enlightened players will be able to cleanse a lamp or enlighten it inside the Abyss, and this is what triggers for you to start cleansing your Weight of Darkness debuff off of your character on a lamp. Instead of Destiny 1, where you would just go to a lamp and it will start cleansing it, now you have to actually enlighten them. Now, the debuff that is accompanying you with the enlightenment here is just going to be Drained of Light. This is nothing crazy. This is just simply a lockout mechanic for you to be drained of light so that you cannot pick up another Chalice for X amount of time, which just implies that, hey, your teammates need to get involved into the encounter, and then once Drained of Light is gone, you don't die or anything, you will then be able to just reclaim a Chalice if you want to. Now, the main wipe mechanic of the Abyss is called Engulfed in Darkness, which is a pretty straightforward concept. It is a 1-minute timer on your screen. If the timer hits 0, you all die and you wipe. To counteract this, you must either enlighten a lamp or use a preservation node for your Chalice. Preservation nodes are small dunk sites hidden on the ground at random points throughout the Abyss. Your very first one will be guaranteed to be placed at the right of the first Abyss lamp. However, for the rest of them, it seems like there is RNG to these, as far as I could tell in our runs. But these preservation nodes are another method of getting rid of Engulfed with Light before the timer actually kills you. Also, preservation nodes allow players to dunk a Chalice of Light into it to then temporarily have it be idle in there, as opposed to having a new player strip you of the Chalice to give them enlightenment. This is just helpful in the event that too many players have enlightenment or are drained of light, and those both restrict you from holding the Chalice again, so it's just kind of a little middleman to keep your flow going. Aside from using preservation notes to reset your Engulfed in Darkness timer, they also come into play for the challenge mode on contest, as you're only allowed to use one lamp of enlightenment to cleanse your Weight of Darkness stacks per preservation node, which means once you've used a node, you cannot use more than one lamp until you find the next available node to preserve your Chalice. Otherwise, you will automatically wipe to the challenge fail condition. To simplify the order of operations for the encounter, it goes as follows. One player picks up the Chalice of Light, and then your team proceeds to the first lamp. You can choose to stay here and have a player claim the Chalice from the original holder once they're at max stacks. Then that player who lost the Chalice gets their Enlightenment buff, and you can opt to use it on the lamp in order to drop your Weight of Darkness. However, you can also opt to skip the first lamp entirely and go to lamp 2 or 3 and do the same process right there. The only difference here is you choose which lamp your team will be making a quick pit stop at. You continue this process of juggling the mechanic throughout the entire Abyss until you get to the very end with the bridge. But before we get to that, let's mention what's actually inside the Abyss itself. During your adventure to the top, there are many pendulums and holes in the ground to look out for. Pendulums are especially deadly, as getting hit by one directly basically kills you, although you can survive it if it just grazes you. Holes are pretty simple, but sometimes they're hard to spot. Upping your brightness can probably help a bit, as well as considering using grapples for safety, but I wouldn't say those are mandatory. Finally, as you make your way to the top, there is a plate to form a bridge to your exit. just like Destiny 1. The only change to the portion of this fight is you can juggle that chalice from the beginning, and once someone is enlightened, you can accelerate the process with it to make the plate charge faster. As for the enemies, there will largely be just Thrall, Cursed Thrall, some Sword Knights, and then some unstoppable ogres occasionally spawning at you. Once the path is formed, you're pretty much free home. It's simply just go to the end where the light is and complete the encounter, and then move on to the bridge. Encounter number 2 is the infamous bridge encounter. The objective is the same as Destiny 1, get people across the bridge and kill the gatekeepers. However, there are some additional mechanics in play this time around, and there are some tweaks as well. The first tweak is to keep in mind that the sword bearer and the gatekeeper are both chunky in health, or at least they are on contest mode, so you need to actually put in good damage to down the sword bearer, and you won't be able to just down the gatekeeper in 2 sword slams either. Now, as for the encounter, the chalice is once again in play here. In this encounter, it can be used to pass enlightenment to your team, as well as accelerate the bridge building process, just like the previous encounter. The Shrieker system is largely the same as Destiny 1. You get 3 players on plates, and you begin to form the bridge. Getting off of either of the side plates while trying to form the bridge will cause the Shriekers to scream, and if left unchecked, you will wipe your team. So be mindful of when you're standing off and on the plates if that's your duty. Another tweak for the encounter is that these side plates will be greeted occasionally with barrier champions. At first, they'll just be on the home side, but eventually you will have them on the away team as well. It's highly recommended that the plate players have anti-barrier ready on demand. For the sorting mechanic in this encounter, you must have the Enlightened buff in order to pick up the Hive Sword and be able to use it. Additionally, you can't drop the sword once you have it, otherwise it'll despawn and you will have to get a new one. For the bridge process itself, if you try to cross the bridge unbuffed, you will die to being unworthy. However, you can cross the bridge if you're enlightened or have the Chalice of Light. So there's a few ways you can go about this. You can opt to send 1 person over at a time, you can opt to send 2 players at a time to start, Chalice plus Enlightened with Sword, or you can choose to enlighten everybody on your team, minus the last person who will be the current Chalice user/holder at the very end, and then send 2 people over, that being the Chalice and the Sword, and afterwards you send 1 person at a time while everybody's already enlightened, so they're halfway there ready to go. The reason why you can't just send a mess of people across the bridge at once is because you will need to kill 5 gatekeepers total to progress the encounter, which means you will need 5 sword bearers to cross at some point during the encounter. You can't just run recklessly across the bridge and then be done. Once your initial player or 2 players cross the bridge, you'll be greeted with a gatekeeper and some acolytes, plus a Hive Knight. The Chalice user here has to be mindful of their timer, since remember, if your timer hits 0, you die. To counteract this, you can either have your fellow teammate take the Chalice off of you, or you can dunk it into the reserved node/podium that's located right in front of the door, and the Hive statues right at the bottom of the staircase. It's also extremely helpful if your Chalice user has Tractor Cannon with them in order to blind the Gatekeeper, or enemies around them for that matter, to allow your Sword Bearer to freely deal with the Gatekeeper. Remember, Tractor Cannon not only weakens enemies, but it also blinds them temporarily, so it's really helpful. Once your Sword Bearer has dealt with the Gatekeeper, there'll be a preservation podium for your sword, similar to how there is one for your Chalice. They look slightly different from the Chalice one, and they're a few feet away from the Chalice node, so you won't have to look forward to put yours in. Now, depending if you choose to enlighten everyone before crossing the bridge or not, you can just repeat the cycle now. If somebody's already enlightened, then they can just get the sword and cross the bridge to down another Gatekeeper. If you did, great. The next person can just go from there. If not, then you'll be able to reclaim the Chalice from the reserve spot whenever you're ready, and then you can head back to home base, and then you can get re-enlightened, and then you or anyone else enlightened can take another sword, cross the bridge, and down another Gatekeeper. But this time, the Chalice will be staying at the home base temporarily. After you've had 3 people cross the bridge, you can now start forming the bridge from the away side instead of home base. This allows your home base team to start freely going around and being able to take out the sword bearers so they can cross the bridge themselves. Repeat this process until you have done 5 sword preservations/gatekeeper kills, and then you're almost done. From here, you get a similar experience as the end of bridge from D1. Enemies will start spawning in, a bunch of gatekeepers are going to start rushing you, and you'll have to use the preserved swords available to you to slay the gatekeepers. Keep in mind, during this process, you can just have your Chalice of Light just kind of chilling in the reservation node while you deal with the gatekeepers. Finally, you have one last step. Use your Chalice to make people enlightened, and then once enlightened, find wizards that are periodically spawning into the arena from the left and the right sides. Enlightened players can then expunge a wizard to progress the encounter. Once you've expunged enough wizards, there will be a yellow bar ogre that spawns in from the left and the right of the arena, as well as most likely being accompanied by a barrier champion. Take them out, and then just go dunk in the Chalice into the node, and you'll be done with the bridge encounter. Encounter number 3 is Iryut, the Death Singer. Right off the bat, throw out pretty much everything you know about Iryut from Destiny 1 out the window, as now Bungie has made this a full-blown boss encounter. The encounter begins similar to Destiny 1. You have 2 knights directly in front of you to blow through. Then there's a wave of enemies for you to kill in the arena, and that is about where the similarities to D1 end. There'll be several acolytes and yellow bar knights to kill in the arena, which need to be killed to progress the encounter. I'd like to make a quick shout out to Cenotaph and Aeon users here, as you make mountains of heavy during this part for later. But moving on, once you have dealt with enough enemies, a Shrieker opens up on the left and right side of the crystal room in the center. Kill both of those to open up the center room, including the window that's normally covered up in D1. This, however, will not let you damage Iryut just yet. From here, the Chalice mechanic makes its appearance. Quick note about the Chalice, you have a preservation podium / node in this room. It's directly under the crystal room, so you can just drop down later if you need it. This can be used later to pass the Chalice or to just keep yourself from dying. After the center room is opened up to you, 3 wizards and 4 shriekers will spawn in throughout the arena. It's your job to locate the wizards specifically, as they are your key to victory. Every team call these something different, but for our team we numbered them 1 through 7, with 1, 2, and 3 being directly above the crystal room from left to right, and yeah, you will be jumping up there in D2 unlike Destiny 1. 4 and 5 are the top and bottom of the far left tower close to the Oversoul, and then the far right tower will be labeled 6 and 7, with 7 being the bottom. You can break up your team to scout these as you please, but there are a few ways to go about how you do it. First, Shriekers during this are labeled as in air or as a vehicle, so they'll show up as such on the radar. Think like Warlocks with heat rises in the air. If you do not see this icon, then that is a wizard instead. This allows you to simply be under 1, 2, or 3, and then immediately know which is a wizard and which is not. Over at 4 and 5, you can simply peek into the room and notice if you see a piece of a Shrieker in the room or not. If you don't, then it's a wizard, who may occasionally also float around in plain sight too. 6 and 7, on the other hand, are a pain in the ass, as the radar can kind of be misleading, but there is something you can do about that as well. One method is to look at the radar icon that I mentioned earlier, and if you do not see an arrow in the center of it, then it's a Shrieker. If you do see an arrow, then it's a wizard. Additionally, I do want to give a shout out to hunters using True Sight, which can also tell you where the locations of the wizards are, and I believe Wishender can do this as well. Once you've located the wizards, just alert your team with the callout, whatever it may be, 2, 3, 7, etc. And in the meantime, while you're not scouting, you should be at the home base with the crystal, helping your team kill ads and then build up enlightenment through the Chalice. Once you're enlightened, you're capable of bypassing these shield barriers that were protecting the wizards that we were just talking about, but be careful, as even touching the barrier when you're enlightened will start the Dark Liturgy. So make sure all your members are ready before you cross in, just to be synchronized and on time. Once Dark Liturgy is active, you have a set timer to kill the wizards, which will then break Iryut's immunity shield and allow you to damage her. And additionally, if you do not pass the damage threshold on Iryut, the part that's glowing on her health bar, then she will attempt to wipe you. Now, I personally had not done this. Our team just ignored this and killed her outright in 2 phases, but apparently you can use the expunge mechanic on her, and this will stop the wipe. But if you do happen to pass through that damage threshold, whatever time you have left on the clock for Dark Liturgy can be used here to just continue to do damage on her as much as you possibly can, and then the phase will end when the clock hits 0. After the damage phase is complete, you are then reset, and this time around you skip the opening portion, and you can just be freely in the center of the room, and then you can proceed to the scouting phase once again. This time around, though, there'll be 4 wizards for you to scout to kill, and should you have to 3-phase Iryut, the next time around there will be 5 wizards for you to scout out and kill later on. The same process still applies, though. Scout the wizards, enlighten your team, set up shop, slay, and then damage phase, rinse and repeat. Do this until Iryut is defeated. As for the challenge mode, in the event that you're watching this while contest is still active, the key for this is to cycle the Chalice mechanic across your entire team before anybody is able to hold it a second time for enlightenment. This means just passing around enlightened until everyone has gone through, and it's again worth noting that there is a preservation node for the Chalice under the crystal room for you to utilize in the event that you need to place it in there to stay alive and or have people use their enlightenment. This takes some coordination to get used to and be active as a team to pass the Chalice around, but otherwise, it's not too crazy to get the habit for. As for damage, for comps on Iryut, while my team opted to take her down in 2 phases with rockets, which does help for challenge, 2 phases instead of 3, there are also other methods that can 2 or 3 phase, such as Legend of Acreus, or even Thunderlord. And yes, Thunderlord actually does put in very good damage on her with the Divinity Cage up. Just wanted to note that. Once Iryut is defeated, you have arrived at the main event. Your main event is Crota, the son of Oryx. Much like Iryut, while there are some similarities to Crota in D1, most of it is just thrown out the window. First, the presence of Crota is active, just like D1, but we have about 600 ways of healing in Destiny 2, so genuinely, I don't think this is really a concern. Second, Crota is now a mobile boss and is not stationary to be in one corner for X amount of time, meaning that he will roam around the top side of the arena as he pleases, or if I choose to baby aggro him in the background footage here. Third, Crota can still slam you. However, even on contest mode, he does not one-shot you, especially if you are properly equipped with resilience and proper resist mods. Melee, arc resist, concussive work great here. You can also run harmonic resist instead if you're on a arc subclass for this fight, which I think, in my opinion, should only be arc striders. For the encounter mechanics, the Chalice again makes its return, and this time it'll spawn right under where Crota will be standing in the middle, by where the Sword Bearer spawn door is located. However, this is not where the Preservation node is located. That is still located right under the Crystal Room, the very same one that can be used during the Eryute boss fight. The Chalice still functions as it has, but there is one added layer now. There will be a podium of light located at a random spot in the arena, but generally within the center. When your Chalice has hit its maximum stacks, you need to be inside this podium of light in order to properly pass the Chalice off and receive Enlightened. Once passed off, your team can continue to do the same thing. Meanwhile, your job as Enlightened has two functions. Function number one is being the Sword Bearer, similar to how it was in the Bridge encounter. As a Sword Bearer, you are the only way to break Crota's shield in order to down him temporarily and go to damage. But we'll get to that in a second. Function number two is holding Enlightened in order to deal with the Oversoul that will spawn in later in the fight. So in essence, you always want an Enlightened player going into the damage phase that is not a Sword Bearer. Now, I should note that technically, Enlightened has one more extra mechanic here, and that is being able to expunge Crota with it while he is down to do a little bit of extra damage. However, this will take your Enlightened, and you won't be able to break the Oversoul anymore, so I think that's a bit of a risk, but more on that in a bit. For the arena, the Boomer Towers make a return with the 2 knights located at both towers. Killing all 4 knights is what triggers the Sword Bearer to spawn this time, and he brings along some friends with him. 2 ogres will spawn in with him as well, and after the ogres and Sword Bearer are defeated, after a short amount of time, a new set of boomers will spawn in the towers. This is how you're able to cycle more than 1 sword at a time throughout the fight. As for the other enemies, you'll have Thrall, Cursed Thrall, and Wizards spawning in periodically into the arena as the fight progresses. The Wizards do not stop spawning as far as I can tell, so as your team gets closer to their damage phase, they'll just keep infinitely spawning, so don't try to put all your focus on them. For the Sword Bearer himself, he is the only enemy in this fight that you can utilize for heavy ammo. This means using Cenotaph Warlock helmets and Aeon gauntlets on him will be massive for ammo purposes. Make sure your team coordinates this. Quick mention to Team Comms here, Phoenix Protocol Warlocks are very valuable here, being able to cycle Will of Radiance in the middle of the arena as you set up your Enlightened players. If you have at least 1 Hunter on your team, I suggest they run Gathering Storm, as it has the potential to temporarily stagger Crota. And then finally, for Titans, I believe Solar Bonk with Burning Maul is your key setup here. It allows you to actively deal with enemies on a dime with your hammers, and you're able to be a flex position with Tractor Cannon to debuff enemies. This includes Crota, and your Burning Maul can have a similar function on Crota as Gathering Storm, where it staggers him a bit. One final thing before we dive into Crota's DPS, it's important to note that you can go preserve your Chalice of Light before fighting Crota. That way, once the damage phase is complete, you can then go restart your cycle and build up again in the exact same order, and you won't have to worry about someone's Chalice timer expiring during DPS. Now, as for Crota himself, it's very important that you keep in mind he can and he will destroy your Well of Radiance, and very easily at that. Additionally, Hive Boomers will be shooting you as well, so going into this with multiple wells is absolutely the best call. And one last thing to know about those Hive Boomers, you can prep ahead of time, and depending on what side you're on and what side Crota is leaning on, you can just take out those 2 Boomer Knights, and if Crota is in the middle, you can take out 1 Boomer Knight on each side to minimize damage and not have a new set of Boomer Knights spawn in, as well as 2 Ogres in the middle. For taking down Crota's shield, the Tractor Cannon that I mentioned earlier is a great utility, as it allows your Sword Bearers to do more damage to his shield through this. Also, your Tractor user can use Healing Grenades to protect themselves and or the Sword Bearers going in for the slam. For your Sword Bearer, the choice of what attacks you use do matter, at least on contest, and you have a small window to do this. When having the sword, your super energy also builds up very quickly, and you want to save that for Crota himself. Once you're set up and are ready to attack, the best 2 methods of damage that I have seen are the following: light attack, heavy attack, super, then heavy attack, and then run. Alternatively, you can also do light attack, heavy attack, super, and then up to 3 light attacks. However, this might open you to taking more damage, so it could be a little more risky. If done correctly, one single sword can take off over half of Crota's shield. Now, in terms of how you want to break his shield, this will be up to your team, as you can have 1, 2, or even 3 sword bearers for the time to go in to break Crota's shield. In fact, you will actually need multiple swords, preferably 3, to do so for Crota challenge mode if you plan to do that. You can get used to using 3 sword bearers on your first go around before going to challenge mode, just to get a little practice in if you'd like. But I'll include a clip of what it looks like to do it with 3 in the background footage here.
I have first wall.
Okay, go. Good.
Move.
Noah has second well. Everybody has a well, so we're good.
Nice.
I've got your timing, more.
After his Crota's shield is broken, 2 things happen. 1, the Oversoul will spawn in, but don't worry yet, the Destiny 2 version has a time limit on it, and you can properly time when to take it down. The other thing that happens is Crota will kneel down for a few seconds, and this will allow you to do some free damage before rising back up. When he does rise, a good tip here is to have your Gathering Storm Super from your Hunter hit Crota right now, and then this will stun him for a few seconds. You can also have your Burning Maul player do the same thing, but if your Titan is also your Tractor user, make sure that they use Tractor before their Super. Outside of these small little stagger phases, Crota will be wailing on you the entire time, and I mean just non-stop sword slams over and over again, including breaking your Well of Radiance and slamming people away. Your best bet for popping your well here is to try to do it on top of Crota. That way it's stationed in the air and potentially he will never hit it. As for damage, Crota, I think far and away the best 2 options for this, in contest at least, are the Legend of Acreus and the Lament. Lament has a nice ease of use and does good damage on Crota, while being able to also stay on him for most of the time, you know, until your sword swings, like, right through Crota, you know, melee registration and all that. Meanwhile, Legend of Acreus, on the other hand, is an absolute cannon and tears Crota apart, and between Legend of Acreus and a Gathering Storm Super, I personally was hitting over 6 million damage on Crota. That's pretty decent if you ask me, even if you include sword damage on top. So if you have either of these weapons, especially Acreus, I would absolutely bust them out for damage on Crota. As the timer for the damage phase and the Oversoul winds down, that extra Enlightened player that I mentioned earlier can shoot the Oversoul down. Now, since the Oversoul is not a precision enemy, don't bother using things like snipers on it, and instead run something practical like a fusion rifle. They deal with the Oversoul very easily, and no, you don't even have to be in front of the room next to it to get it down. Assuming you've dealt with the Oversoul in time, your rotation is now complete, and now your main focus is to just get the hell away from Crota and survive. From here on, the fight does not change at all until you continue to the final stand. Now, keep doing what you're doing, and just be mindful of your ammo situation, and make sure that you don't push Crota into final stand at a bad time when you're all out of ammo. If you have to, try edging him as close as possible to that last bar without actually going over. Then perform one more rotation to get your ammo ready before you head into Final Stand. Once Final Stand has been activated, Crota will go berserk for a second and then try to slam you all away. You can avoid this entirely and just go get ammo while he does this if you'd like. Also, I like to shout out Shoot the Loot during this part, where you can just shoot the ammo and go into Final Stand right away. After Crota has done having his hissy fit, you can continue to damage him. This is now a sprint to kill Crota before he kills you. The Oversoul is once again active, but this time you can't perma-cleanse it, so this fight is going to end with either Crota dead or the Oversoul / Crota killing you. While you can break the Oversoul temporarily, be aware that you have to hit everything on Crota and just dump everything on him for damage to down him before your team has lost all its Enlightened buffs and the Oversoul wipes you. Once you succeed in Final Stand, congratulations, you've completed Crota's End, a raid significantly harder than Root of Nightmares. That is a sentence I did not think would happen in the year 2023, but here we are. If you do choose to go into challenge mode, I wish you luck, and just remember to practice those 3-man sword rotations at Crota. Don't waste time with doing 2, as failing to break his shield will just automatically challenge fail and then wipe you. That's all I've got for you guys today. Hope you guys enjoyed the video and the guide. If you did, subscribe today. Maybe consider leaving a like or a comment. It does help the channel and is appreciated in tackling that YouTube algorithm. Alright, thanks for watching. I'll catch you guys next time.